Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Beautifully Broken podcast. We're joined by our esteemed guest, Dean Hall. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Freddie. I am so excited to be here. It's almost a little embarrassing how much I've been looking forward to this conversation with you.
Well, we tried, and we got probably 10, 15 minutes into your story, and the connection, it could have happened, but I was like, Dean, your story is so incredible and you're such a great speaker that I wasn't willing to let the world, at least this portion of my little world, be introduced to you in that way. So I just wanted to get internet right.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was going to tell everybody it wasn't the connection between us.
It was not
the connection between me and my own crappy internet, but that's been solved.
Yeah, and now here you are in 4K.
Yeah,
I think I'd love to. I think I'd love to start out. Dean, do you hold a world record?
I hold two. I am the first person in history to not just do one thing, but two. I am the first person in the world, and still to this day, the only person to have swum the entire length of the Willamette River, the longest river in Oregon. It's 187 miles long. And the reason most people haven't done it is it's largely a snowmelt river. And so when I did it, we'd had a lot of snow that year. And so it was exceptionally cold. It was 42 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit the first 16 days, which we'll talk about at some point. And then in 2017, I went over and I was finally no evidence of disease, in remission, and newly married, Freddie. I had warned my wife, but we got married a couple months later. I take her over to Ireland to show her what a badass I am. That's not what happened at all. What happened was just a struggle of endurance. It was a great story, but that took me 25 days to swim their longest river, the River Shannon. And it's 180 miles long, but it had no current, had 3 lakes that are so large, they considered them inland seas. And 23 of the 25 days, we had a 10 to 15 mile an hour or more headwind. And if you know anything about wind and water, if you've got more than a 10 mile an hour headwind, it moves the first 2 feet of the water in the direction of the wind. And so literally I clawed out 180 miles like I was on a treadmill. It was just inch by inch. And so
Wow.
it was really something. It was just this beautiful journey though, because I got my daughter to be my guide boater. And so she got that same time on the river that I did. And it was extremely healing for her grief journey, having just lost her mom, 6-8 years before. Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. Dean, how does someone swim 187 miles? There must be some type of a unique technique to open water swimming at that distance.
Yeah, two things. I mean, technically, I use something called total immersion swimming, which is I had to change my competitive stroke to a total immersion stroke. And it largely, you hardly kick at all. As a matter of fact, you stick your head and chest and shoulders down farther into the water so it pops your feet up behind your torso and puts you in a good draft position. And then in order to not exhaust yourself, you mostly use your core. I call it water yoga. You're just using your core and then using that core to pull mostly. And so it's this really nice, beautiful rhythm you can get into. And once you learn how, the technique is so efficient, you can just go forever, it seems. Now, they found that anything over about 100 meters, if you're kicking, you're just creating drag. It looks good, it looks powerful, but it really, unless you got big, gigantic Michael Phelps feet, it really doesn't.
Flippers.
Yeah, really doesn't help. But mostly when you ask that question, the proper answer is the right mindset and attitude. Number one, I would just, it pains me to see how you hear most endurance swimmers talk, and they're dissociating. They're singing a song over and over. I listened to one guy, and he said he plays his favorite movies in his mind.
Mm.
That's total bullshit. Of course, by this time, I started meditating 1 hour a day in October of 2000. And so by this time, it was October 2000, or June rather, of 2014. For about 13 and a half, 14 years, I've been meditating and practicing mindfulness. And so for me, a lot of being able to do this the way I do it is a combination of just really being there and enjoying it and being alive, even when it's hard, even when you're hurting, even when you want to stop, just noticing that struggle. And I should preface that to say, I had almost died 3 times. As a matter of fact, I wasn't pronounced dead, but there were 3 times I've woken up in the hospital and they said, "Whoa, you're awake?" "Yeah." "We didn't think you'd make it." And so, and then having my first wife die 15 days for our 30th anniversary, I've been given this precious gift through that kind of tragic event to realize how precious life is. And so when I just want to quit, when it felt like, both times when it felt like it wasn't worth it, I would remember, hey, I'm alive. And this wasn't placed on me. I chose to do this. And I'm out here doing this great adventure. I'm not in a hospital wondering if I'm going to live through the day. And so it really changes the way you look at things. And then the second thing in that mindset is, especially when you're trying to accomplish something no one in history has ever accomplished before, I just would honestly continue to tell myself, well, if it was easy, somebody else in the history of humankind would have done it. So, it's hard, and that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you still actively swimming today? Are you still doing? Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't get my swim in this morning because I'm editing the final formatting of one of my books that's coming out here in just a short minute. But as soon as we're done, I've got, I call it my beloved Clackamas. I've got a tributary that flows into the Willamette that comes out of the mountains, and it is so pristine and clean. As a matter of fact, the water quality is higher than the water quality in the drinking water in France, which might say something about the French. I don't know. But it's so clear and so clean that you can see every rock and pebble on the bottom, and you can see my swim buddies, trout and salmon. I don't have to share a lane with other humans, just other people with fins. And then we've got eagles roosting in 100-foot Douglas firs. And so it's just part nature connection, part cold water immersion, part swimming. The Europeans call it wild swimming instead of outdoor swimming. And I love that, or open water swimming. Because
Incredible.
it feels very wild. So yeah, I rarely miss a day in the Clackamas when I'm home.
Incredible. Well, I wanna give people some context, Dean. The evolution of your story it's epic, and there's different layers. And you mentioned the passing of your first wife. Can you take us there at that point in your life? Like, what was happening, and how did that unfold?
Yeah, it unfolded frighteningly quickly. She was the healthiest person I'd ever known. In 30 years, I can't really ever remember her being sick. She came, Her father's parents came over from Germany in the early 1900s and brought what's called the Russian red wheat, which is largely used in Oklahoma now. And they were hardy stock. Most of them, as a matter of fact, one of her uncles, Uncle Elso, was still doing harvest in an unconditioned cab at 98. And so we just thought she'd live forever. She thought she'd live forever. And one summer of 2010, she got pneumonia, which isn't that unusual in rural Kansas. During the harvest, there's so much wheat dust in the air, and it's so hot and so humid, and people are staying inside and going from hot humidity to very cold air conditioning, and that creates, kind of a recipe for disaster. And so we thought she just became fairly listless and not full of energy, which was absolutely not her. As a matter of fact, for 30 years, she'd had 2 speeds, extremely fast and asleep. One of her cousins said that Mary could solve world peace before she could get her shoes on. That's how much energy that girl had. And so it was very unusual. And it just, to me, intuitively, it felt off. Because I had almost died of pneumonia 2 years earlier. I knew pneumonia, and I'm like, she's not coughing a lot. She's not struggling for breath. This is odd how listless she is. And so after a while, I said, let's take another look. The day after I said that, her whole right side fell of her face, and she couldn't use her arm, was dragging her right leg. And so we went in. They thought maybe she had Meniere's disease. That didn't feel right. Went in for a brain scan, and they found the largest brain tumor the surgeon had ever seen of its kind in 30 years. And brain tumors are operable to the extent they're high in the brain and forward. And hers was all the way back down around her brain stem. They told me that even with later laser-guided surgery at that time, there was an 80% chance they would nick a nerve and she'd be a quadriplegic the rest of her life, or they'd nick a blood vessel and she'd bleed out. But even if things went perfectly, they said it'd probably only give her another 6 months, and that 6 months would be like living with the flu and a migraine all at the same time. Mm. So we opted out, and 52 days later, she was gone, 15 days for our 30th anniversary. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, and the ironic thing was I was considered a grief expert in the Midwest. I'd done seminars, I'd written all sorts of magazine and newspaper articles. And when she died, I realized experientially I knew nothing. As a matter of fact, I was so shocked by how difficult it was that I called up some of my old clients and apologized. I said, I didn't know. And they were gracious. And they said, oh, Dean, you did fine. And I'm like, I'm not sure I did. Because it was just so terribly difficult.
Yeah. And how did Dean do in that time? How did you manage?
I lost myself. I'd been raised by 2 mountain climbers. Even my mom was a mountain climber out here in Oregon. And they were the only parents in the 60s that I knew of that actually liked each other. As a matter of fact, they were crazy about each other. And they were crazy about adventuring. And so even though I was extremely ADHD as a kid, I was out in the wilderness almost all the time. And because they were so loving toward each other, the ripple effect is it developed a pretty secure, confident kid. I never really felt like I didn't know who I was. All the other adolescents go through their times of angst. I really didn't. I was having a good time. Mm-hmm. And then college was fun. And then I met Mary, and she was great. But insidiously, Freddie, I hadn't realized how much of my adult identity had been wrapped up in being Mary's husband. About 6, 8 months before we got married, she came to me and she said, I love you. I'm always going to love you. But you came to Kansas. I didn't come to Oregon. And I'm close to my family. If you want to be married to me, you're going to have to live here. So I came home, and Oregon just wasn't as beautiful without Mary. So told all my friends I was putting myself in exile for love. And that's what I did for 30 years. And the people are nice, but I mostly hated it. I never fit in. And in this little rural town, 4 miles from the Oklahoma border, deep in the heart of what I call redneckery, if you hadn't grown up in this little town of 12,000, or your grandparents hadn't, you were an outsider.
Of
And at
course.
first it kind of bothered me. No one called me by my name. They were like, oh, there's Mary's husband, or even to my face, hey, how's Mary's husband? I'm like, my name's Dean. I quickly just forgot about that. And, being Mary's husband was a good gig. And when it was gone, I'd had 30 years where nobody called me by name, really. They just called me Mary's husband. And I didn't realize how that had shaped the man I was. And without that role, I was shattered. I was lost. Cried all the time. Never really cried before Mary died. And I've been in a lot of hard situations, but raised in the 60s, guys don't cry, which is silly. But I couldn't talk about the weather. I couldn't talk about anything. And I had a pretty good speaking career going. Had to cancel everything because I was talking. She was kind of my agent, more just kind of my promoter, lady who helped me get these gigs. And we were just talking about some of the gigs I had coming up, and I couldn't get through a phone conversation without just breaking down and bawling. And I thought, geez, I can't do this on stage. And so I had to cancel everything. Yeah. Really lost.
And you and your wife, you share that you've both struggled with cancer.
Yeah.
And that's been a recurrent theme. And which so many people, unfortunately, that's gonna be a part of the story. And where did that start for you, Dean?
In 4 days before Christmas in 2006, I had played a lot of soccer as a kid, and I saw not too long ago a T-shirt that said, "The older I get, the better I was," and that kind of explains my soccer career. I thought it was pretty good. I was first team All-State 2 years in a row. I was on the first Nike-sponsored team and an Olympic development team that took us to England, and we played with Liverpool and Manchester. So I thought I was great until I got to play with Liverpool and Manchester, and they made me look like Bobo the Dancing Bear, which was a wonderful experience in humility for the 16-year-old Dean. So I had several scholarships around the U.S., and on a lark, because I love history so much, and what a lot of people, unless you're a history nerd like I am, don't realize how much American history is in Kansas. It's really even the start in many ways of the Civil War. And a lot of people don't know that with John Brown. And so I thought I could go and play soccer and go to Dodge City and go to John Brown's home and all these different places and kind of get paid for it. So I did, not knowing I'd meet Mary, and he stuck there for the next 30 years. So all that soccer led to a really bad plant knee, my left knee, because I was right-footed, and I'd gotten in a couple really bad accidents playing soccer and just pulled all the tendons and ligaments and had several knee surgeries. And so by the time I was 25, they said, Dean, you really need a total knee. But this was back in the 80s. They're like, the total knees right now only last about 20 years. And so you're going to have to wait. And so I waited for 21 years till I was 46. And finally, I was old enough to get this, and they'd gotten better. They were going to last 50 years. And so at 46, I decided, hey, right during Christmas, a lot of people don't want therapy. From Christmas to New Year's, everybody's busy. So I'll go ahead and have this total knee surgery and then get back to work. And so I took a blood test, and that's how I found out I had leukemia. And the doctor, who is my good friend, he's like, didn't you know? I mean, most people with your level of leukemia are so tired. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm working around the clock. I thought it was natural. So, yeah, had no idea I was that sick.
Yeah. And what brought you to, Dean, where in the story does it unwind in which you're inspired to start doing these long distance swims? Like
Yeah.
what was the impetus?
Well, I got better, and then I had a lot of bumps, almost died a couple more times after Mary. And after Mary, I sold my business. This little town was never going to let me be anything but Mary's husband. And even though that's where my thriving practice was, all my adult friends, I just thought I'll fold everything back up and come back to Oregon, restart my life. I'd been homesick for Oregon for 30 years, so I thought, why not? And so I came back not knowing, now I don't have an income or a business or an identity or my adult friends or a community. I am all alone. And that isolation just threw me into a tailspin. And for the next 2.5, 3 years, I just got worse and worse and worse. And then in August of 2013, Mary died in 2010. August of 2013, I'm 6'1", and I usually stay pretty lean. I usually run right around between 210 and 215. I was down to 152 pounds. I was
Wow.
still, and I've never been what I would call a pretty boy. But Freddie, I was ugly with a capital UG. As a matter of fact, I was so ugly that I made it a practice for the last year or two never to look in the mirror because it was so disappointing and discouraging. And one day in August of 2013, I accidentally looked up, and it shocked me. You could see every rib. You could see, even the bones in my elbow and arm. I mean, I become so emaciated. You could see my pelvis. It was pelvic bones. It was just, and I blurted out, "Oh shit, you look like you just walked out of Auschwitz." One of the things I'd done many times throughout my career as a therapist is help people come back to life using Viktor Frankl's work, Man's Search for Meaning. And he actually had been in Auschwitz. And so the first thing I did was apologize. I'm like, hey, Vic, sorry. I realize I look bad. I have no idea what I just said. But it got me to thinking, my daughter at that time now was 20. She lost her mama. Well, she's 21. She lost her mama October of her senior year in high school. And I thought, if I don't get my head straight, she's going to become a 21-year-old orphan. And I cannot abide that thought. And me not being a responsible adult, being who I've always been, kind of moving forward, finding a way, charging, me just being a helpless, whiny victim, which that's probably overly gracious for what I had been, is not only not me, but it's not fair to her. It's entirely selfish. So Viktor Frankl, if your folks aren't familiar with him, he had been an Austrian psychiatrist, and he had wanted to study what is that deciding factor between those who succeed and overcome great tragedy or trauma and those who don't. But when he went to set up his thesis, there's no way he could do it unless he put people through great tragedy or trauma, and that's not ethical. And so he started to do something else. And then he found himself in Auschwitz. And after a couple of weeks of just being shocked, he's like, wait a minute, I didn't choose this, but this is a perfect setting to do what I wanted to study. And so he'd write little notes on scraps of paper and put them in the cracks in the walls so the guards wouldn't find them. And his original hypothesis was the stronger physically people come in, gives them the greater chance to survive. And he found very quickly that wasn't it at all. Even Olympians would come in and in a couple weeks be gone, or a couple months, depending. He found the more passionate you are about a purpose, the greater chance you have to be resilient and overcome. And in Auschwitz, there were two main purposes. One is to see your loved ones again. The other one was to kill as many Nazis as he could. And so I used his book and his work, and I had found no matter what the purpose, it really didn't matter. If a person was passionate about it, they would get better. And so I decided that's what I would do, is I would become passionate about a purpose, but I couldn't think of anything. And so I don't know if you know, I'm sure you of all people probably do, but the brain by its very nature has to answer every question you ask. It cannot ignore a question. You ask a question, it has to answer it. And I had taught people to do that for about 20 years, and I'd done it many times myself. When I'm really stuck and wanting a way out, I'll ask a really what I call juicy question, prayerfully, several times a day, just really with all my heart and soul, just concentrate on it and then let it go. And the longest I'd ever had to wait was about 10 days, about 10 weeks, and it's still crickets. And I'm getting frustrated. And one day I'm doing this thing, and then I just get frustrated and I open my eyes. And it was like I'd woken up. I'd been living in this, I'd been renting for the first time in 30 years, which felt like a real failure. And I hadn't unpacked. All the boxes were still, I was living like a frat boy on a mattress on the floor. And I opened my eyes and I thought, well, while you wait for the universe to answer you, Dean, maybe you could be a responsible adult and unpack and maybe put your bed together. So I started doing that. I started unpacking boxes, and I found a journal. My mom had packed a bunch of my childhood things that she wanted to get rid of. Found a journal that I'd been forced to keep in the 6th grade as an 11-year-old boy. And it said, when I get old, I gotta climb Mount Everest, swim the English Channel. And to this day, when I think about it, I still get the shivers. Just this electric shock just went through me, and I'd forgotten the boy I had been and how I was eager to become a man. And all I wanted to do is become a National Geographic sponsored adventurer. That's how I wanted to live my life. But I was taught, you got to be responsible. You got to go to college. I was brainwashed into this lockstep movement into adulthood. And so I'd forgotten about who I really was. And I thought, even if I die, I got to do this. And then very quickly I realized, well, I'm broke, so I can't get to Everest probably. And my immune system is so depressed, there's no way I could handle altitude. But I can swim the channel. And so that's what I determined to do. And as soon as I did it, I spent 12 years as a triathlete, and not a bad one, not a great one, but I was always in the top 20 or 30. And, it was a good hobby. And so I'd done thousands and thousands of laps, but I hadn't done any really since before Mary died, really since before my first diagnosis. And so that first day when I pushed off the wall, it was like, here's Dean. I remember you. And then I got one length and I didn't think I could make it back across the pool again. But I stayed and I did 11 laps that first day because that's what I promised myself I would do. It took me an hour. Now 11 laps maybe takes me 8 or 9 minutes tops. But I did it. And every day I tried to add another lap, and my head started to clear. I started feeling like myself, started to get a little of my life back. All my numbers started going in the right direction. I started gaining weight and building muscle. It was hard as hell because I had lymphoma. And even though I had lymphoma, I didn't know much about the lymph system. Lymph system are your tiny kind of filters. And when you've got lymphoma, they're clogged and they only work if you're moving. And so when I would move, especially that dramatically, I would know that within 30 minutes, maybe the rest of the day, I would have pretty severe flu-like symptoms because they would release all the toxins into my bloodstream. And so it wasn't just hard. Everybody's like, oh man, it must have been hard going and doing those laps. No, the laps, yeah, they were hard, but it wasn't as hard as knowing what was going to happen after you did them. So it's just, that was the hardest point because I didn't know if anybody would ever care. I didn't know if I'd even live long enough to get to the river. But even then, Freddie, it was better than just the way my last 3 years had been, sitting doing nothing, feeling sorry for myself. I was doing something. I was passionate. I had a place to put my mind. And very quickly, one day, after about 3 months of swimming, I was swimming more than a mile. And the thought occurred to me, who cares if another middle-aged man, puts on a Speedo and swims to France? It does the world no good. And in my case, it's not going to be a pretty picture. We're not going to create any posters off of this thing. And so then I went back and started prayerfully asking, okay, I've got this mission. I want to do this swim. What is it that I could do that would do the world some good? And because I was never, from the start, very interested in proving to anyone that I'm some kind of big badass, because I was a broken down, cancer-ridden 54-year-old who had never been on a swim team in his life, never won a swim race. So I'm no poster boy. And within a couple of days, that time of praying and asking, this old dream of becoming the first person, it was 30 years old by that point. I'd been out here for a bike race and I'd done pretty well. I'd come in 18th out of like 800, I don't know. Not a podium, but for Dean Hall, it was a win, And my family, because they are who they are, they were really excited about it. And so they threw me a big picnic on the banks of the Willamette. And when I grew up, the Willamette was just a sewer. As a matter of fact, the big joke in grade school was if Jesus had walked across the Willamette, it wouldn't have been a miracle because it wasn't really water. It was just an oil slick. But in the late 70s and early 80s, a lot of protection laws, environmental laws got put in place, and it was dramatically cleaned up. And I'd been gone. And so here I am on the banks of this river that I'd always thought of as a sewer. And it was gorgeous. It was big. It was blue. There was a lot of waterfowl. You could see fish. It was alive. And things were growing. And it just energized me just standing there. And my dad came down and we were kind of talking. And I looked at him thinking I was going to impress him because he's a man I always wanted to impress because he's run most of the world's major marathons. He's climbed every mountain on the West Coast, several times, like Mount Hood. I think he climbed it the first time when he was 9, and he climbed it another 40 times or so. So this is, a man I really respected. And I said, hey, Dad, anybody ever swum this whole thing? And I thought he'd pat me on the back and say, that's my boy, He's like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. He's like, where do you come up with this crap? Well, that stuck the hook in. Now I got to prove him wrong, And so I worked on it for a couple years, and then finally Mary's like, "How long is this going to take you?" And I said, probably about 3 weeks. It's 187 miles long, and no one's ever done it." And she's like, "Oh, okay. We're saving money to buy a house. Um, who's going to pay the rent? And you're just going to take 3 weeks off work?" I'm like, "Oh, I never thought of that." And so I put it on the shelf, and it died. And I'm almost glad it had now, because I wasn't the man. At that time, I wanted to prove what a tough guy I was, and I wanted to be in the record books. I didn't want to do the world any good. And I wasn't mentally strong enough. I was physically way stronger than I was at 54, of course. But mentally, I don't. I probably would have found a way to do it, but it wouldn't have been the same beautiful journey at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so what changed? When did you pick it up?
Well, that Christmas, it came back to me, and I'm like, "Oh, that makes sense. I was born only 4 blocks from it. I grew up with it. It came back to life. Maybe I can too. And it's right here. I don't have to travel all the way over to England. And it's more organic and authentic. I can develop a community right here." And then at first my parents thought it was just insane, and my mom cried a couple times. But once they found I actually was going to do it, and I was starting to get some help from a local organization here, they jumped in and they wanted to be a part of it, even though they were 79 at the time. And one of the coolest parts of the whole story, and when you go for your dreams, Freddie, and I've seen this many, many times since, because I did this, I get to coach many people who are trying to do their own big impossible dream. And they know I can help them because I was able to do mine, not just once, but twice, and hopefully many more. And so I give them the mindsets and kind of help them know what it's kind of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, really, if you want to look it up. But I help many people do it. And what I found is, if you go for your dream's not going to be like anyone else's. But if you really do it, you'll be tested. But if you don't back down and you just keep moving through what I call the desert of big dreams, then pretty soon life is just going to be handing you these gifts that would never have come if you hadn't had the courage to follow your dreams. And one of them was, since it's 187 miles, I had 6 different kayakers, guide boaters, because when you're swimming in a river, you can see about 40 to 50 yards ahead of you and about 10, 15 feet. But danger is always about 20, 30 yards. And then also when you get around places that there are boaters, they won't be able to see in the water. So you've got to have a kayaker so that they know not to run over you. And so river swimmers always follow, most open water swimmers have to have a kayak in order to have safety. And so I had a set of 6, and a month or so, I think it was 6 weeks before we were actually going to start, 4 out of the 6 dropped. And I'm just like, we've been working on this for months. What are we going to do?
This is my team.
Yeah. And they were all apologetic, and they all had legitimate reasons. And my dad, I don't know if you've ever heard, there's a huge world famous relay race called Hood to Coast out here in Oregon. And my dad had been very instrumental in getting that off the ground, and in the 80s, getting it organized with the coordinator, Bob Foote. And so he's really good at, and because of all his multi-stage mountain climbs and backpacks, he's really good at breaking things down into stages. So he was helping me plan this swim and breaking it down into daily stages, where we'd get in, where we'd get out, how many miles we'd swim, what the conditions would be, all that kind of stuff. And so he's largely, by this time, involved in it. And so I called him up. I'm like, geez, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I thought, well, I thought he would say, well, we'll figure it out. We'll call some people. But he was kind of quiet. And then the next day he calls me up and he's like, hey, Dean. And he does sound exactly like that. Almost worse now because he's 90 this year. But he's like, hey, I know what we're going to do. And I said, what's that? And he's like, I'll do it. I'm like, oh, okay. Great. I'd love that, especially for maybe a portion that doesn't have any rapids or switchbacks, an easier portion. He's like, what? I'm like, yeah, but what are we going to do with the other 3 that dropped down? He's like, no, I don't think you get it. I'm like, what's that? He was like, I'll do it. I'm like, yeah, that's what you said. He's like, no, I'll do the whole thing. We can call the other 2. We don't need them. I'm like, what? I'm like, Dad, you're 79. He's like, no problem. I'm like, Dad, you've never been in a kayak. He's like, I'll learn. I got some time. I'll learn. And so that's what we did. We started getting in the river and doing practice swims. And this environmental organization, the Willamette River Keepers, that are just, we couldn't have done it without them, put us in connection with 2 of the best river guides in Oregon that knew the Willamette intimately. They're on it every day for the last 20, 30 years previous. They took Dad under their wing, showed him how to kayak, showed him what to do in different situations. It was just this cool thing. And so one of the beautiful gifts is I got to spend 22 days with my dad. And, we'd always been pretty close, and we'd gone on some 2, 3, 4-day backpacking journeys, never been together 24/7 for 22 days. And it was life-changing. Really was.
Wow. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Now, for context, when you're doing this swim, you have 2 active forms of cancer, correct?
Yeah. I had chronic lymphocytic leukemia, which is, according to Western medicine, is never supposed to go away. And then I had non-Hodgkin's small cell lymphoma. And the leukemia had gone down a bit. It was mid-range. It was probably about stage 2 by the time that I swam. And my lymphoma was at about stage 3, 3.5 when I swam.
What was the recommendations or the guidance? Did you tell your medical team you were going to be doing this swim?
Yeah. And they thought I was absolutely nuts. I was going down. My father had struggled with chronic lymphocytic leukemia, even though it's not supposed to have a genetic component at all. And what I think now, and there's some science that kind of proves it, we both love hot tubs. And he had gotten a hot tub when he was running, and for 10, 15 years got in it every night. And it made me jealous, so I bought a hot tub, got in it every night, and we used bromine, lots of it, and soaked up that toxin every night. And so I think for us, that's a large part of why we ended up with leukemia. But you never know. But anyway, he was almost to die in 2002 of leukemia. And his insurance just wasn't helping him, giving him the right doctors. And thankfully, he had quite a bit of money. And so he found one of the world's best, the world's number 3 researcher and oncologist is Dr. Juanerio Castro down at University of California, San Diego at their leukemia clinic. And so he'd fly down there very quickly. Castro turned him around. And when I was at my worst, my parents talked me into starting with Castro as well. And so I did. And when I told Castro what I was going to do, it's like, Dean, this is going to kill you. And I'm like, I'm dying anyway. What do you expect me to do? Just sit and watch Wheel of Fortune on a couch? I'm going to do something. And this is what I'm going to do. And I'd like you to help me. And he said, okay, but let's schedule chemo and radiation for right after this swim. And please, as you're swimming in the pool especially, take more frequent blood tests. And so he put up those strictures, and I followed his guidelines and protocols, and that's what we did. But he wanted to do chemo and radiation right away, and I'm like, I can't do chemo and do this swim. Let's hold off. He's like, well, you're taking your life in your hands. And I said, well, I mean, isn't that where it's supposed to be? And he agreed. And so that's what we did. And so I originally was supposed to go down to California in July of 2014.
Mm-hmm. And so what happened after the swim?
Yeah, I had this great time. I started June 3rd of 2014. And you have to remember, in 2014, people in Europe and some people had started hearing about Wim Hof, but I never had. I didn't hear of Wim Hof till 2015. I wasn't on Instagram. And being an older, crusty guy, I don't think I'd even heard of Instagram at that point. There was no such thing. Nobody was cold plunging. But January of 2014, I knew that the conditions were going to be very cold. And so I thought, if they're going to be shockingly cold, I better start getting my body, because it's in such a mess, I better ease it in and acclimatize it to the cold. So I started taking ice baths, and I started noticing huge benefits, not only for my body, but especially, and now we know that, you're flooded with serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin and norepinephrine. I didn't know that. I just knew that this 5,000 pounds on my chest, my broken heart, would be gone for an hour or two, and I'd feel pretty strong and pretty okay. And I was tempted many times to use it to ignore my grief, but I tried to be responsible and not do that, of course. So I swam, and like I mentioned, it was really cold, 42 to 45 degrees the first 16 days. I was swimming 10 to 12 miles a day, which, unless you've swam 10 miles, that doesn't sound like much. But
Dean,
if you...
I had one lap, I'm toast.
It's hard.
My heart, I don't think anything increases my heart rate like swimming.
Really?
We have Barton Springs. That's right. We have Barton Springs here, and I'll swim across, get out, walk around, swim across, and I'm three, 4 times that, and I'm like, I'm good. There's my cardio. I mean, my heart's cranking. Yeah.
Oh yeah. 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 Finally, because people are so unfamiliar with what that means, unless you're a swimmer or an athlete, I would tell people, hey, especially Oregonians, because mostly I spoke to them, I'd say, hey, any of you been down to Eugene? It takes about 2 hours to get there, hour and a half, 2 hours. Yeah. What was that drive? Oh, long. Can you imagine riding a bike there? Oh, yeah, that'd take a day or two. Can you imagine running there? Oh, that'd take about 3 or 4 days. Can you imagine walking with a backpack? Oh, yeah. Can you imagine crawling there on your hands and knees? And they start to look a little curious. And I say, can you imagine crawling there with a fire hose of cold water in your face? And they're like, what? And I'm like, that's kind of what it was like to swim the Willamette. It was cold, and I had my face sometimes would get so cold, it would swell up and stick to my goggles. I would have a hard time getting my goggles off. Every 45 minutes or so, even with the 3 mil triathlete wetsuit, I was going to thrombosis, or what I call deep core throttle, where you can feel your internal organs banging against your rib cage, which
just to create heat.
Yeah.
Wild.
And that's kind of a sign that you should probably put out. And so can you imagine swimming for 45 minutes, feeling pretty significant hypothermia, swimming to the riverbank, finding as level a place as you can, doing jumping jacks or running in place for 5 or 10 minutes until your body warms up again. Then I'd eat as much as I could. And then the hard part was talking myself into getting back in. And I would have to do that 8-10 times a day for 22 days. And so it was a real mental test. It was hard. And many times it was painful. But the beautiful thing is, and I think life can be so beautiful when you look back on it, is the very hardest challenge. I just tell myself, when my face was all swollen and I was thinking, all day, we had about 5 days where it did nothing but rain. And the first 100 miles, we got no press whatsoever because I think everybody was scared that just this lunatic was on a death wish. And so for days on end, we'd be swimming, and I was trying to raise money for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society, and I was getting no press. Nobody wanted to talk to me. And I'm doing this thing and thinking it's going to be a total failure. Why am I doing this? This is so hard. But the hardest of all of it was just that intense, bone-breaking cold all day long. And yet, come to find out, the first blood test I took, the leukemia was gone. And Castro, he came in and he said, I've been doing this 30 years. If I hadn't diagnosed you myself, I would have thought you'd been misdiagnosed. According to Western medicine, this is never supposed to happen. But I can't ethically say you have chronic lymphocytic leukemia even now, because there's hardly a shred of it left.
Mm.
So it put me into radical remission.
Wow.
Yeah.
Radical remission. It's a radical story. It's a radical story. It always gives me chills. And I have an ask for the audience. Dean, your book, we can't encapsulate it on a podcast. But if there's a book that you want to pick up and just have a smile on your face the whole time, you'll be with Dean, and you'll be with Dean's parents on the river, supporting him through this 22-day journey in which everything that you're telling me, because I've spent time with you and your family in the book, the coloring of your skin, the fatigue, the levels of exhaustion when you pull yourself out of the water, the days that didn't go right, when you didn't hit the mileage that you wanted to, and it didn't feel like it was going to happen, and then to finally get there. It's just a great story, and it's a great, I wrote you into the biological blueprint because there's a section on magic, purpose, body, spirit. And all I think about when I read the book, I was like, I always see you swimming with a flag or a sail. It's a sail, and it's filled with the most profound sense of purpose you could ever have. And so if you had to, was there a dream or a statement that filled that sail for you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The one that kept me going was one I made that I don't tell most people because I've used it with audiences many times, and they're like, huh? But it made perfect sense to me. It was: the extraordinary becomes possible when you make it impossible to remain ordinary. So I wanted to do this extraordinary thing. I couldn't continue to be the ordinary Dean. I had to, as a matter of fact, put up many barriers toward being ordinary and what I had always done. I had to move over that and make it impossible to just stay Dean, especially that whiny, sad sack Dean that I'd been for the 3 years previous. But mostly what I did this for, I really thought it may kill me. But I wanted to go out swinging for the fence. And I wanted to go out trying to accomplish a dream. And so I didn't want it to be about myself. I wanted it to inspire other cancer patients. I felt like if they saw this old guy who had active cancer, who was doing this thing that seems insane, and he keeps doing it, and then maybe even succeeds and accomplishes it, then they will know in their heart that since I'm not special, since I'm not an Olympian, they too have exactly what it takes to refuse to be defined by their diagnosis. The biggest mistake I think we all make is calling ourselves a cancer patient, because then it becomes our identity. And it's not a great identity. It's not a good place to be. And so I wanted to teach others that we have the power inside of us, even if it's not quote unquote successful, to determine how we go, even to the next day, if not the rest of our lives.
Yeah. And so you got out of the river, and from my recollection of the story, you're supposed to start chemo and radiation because, well, the lymphocytic leukemia was gone. You still had stage 3 lymphoma.
Right. Dr. Castro and I thought since the leukemia was gone, my body would have a greater bandwidth to be able to handle lymphoma, and the lymphoma would just kind of dry up and go away. But it didn't. As a matter of fact, it got fairly aggressive. I had, even before I started to swim, I had what Castro called my hockey puck under my right arm, because it was a lymph node the size and shape of a hockey puck. And then I had these huge, terribly swollen lymph nodes under my jawline that made it nearly impossible to move my neck. And I felt were really disfiguring it. It was embarrassing to walk around with these big, they almost look like, when people have gas masks on.
Yeah.
And hazmat. That's what it kind of looked like right here. I'm like, oh, geez. But those just ballooned, and all over my body, they just started popping up everywhere. Under my clavicle, it was like gravel. Same with my abdomen and groin, and then they started popping up all around my thighs. And I had over 76 or 7 that we identified for sure, just manually. And so again, he's like, man, you got to do chemo. And I said, well, doc, I'll do it, but I believe chemo is the atom bomb. And unless we are at the end and have no other choices, I don't want to drop the bomb. So give me 6 months. Nature healed me once. I'm going to see if there's something in nature that can heal me again. He was like, oh my gosh, Dean.
He must have been so mad at you.
Well, he was one of the most loving, kind men I'd ever met. As a matter of fact, one of the first times I met with him, usually you go in, you see an oncologist. If you're lucky, you get 15 minutes. He spent an hour and 20 minutes with me the first time, this world-class oncologist, many times with his hand on my knee, just very caring. And so thankfully, he didn't show me he was angry. I think he probably was. He was a little frustrated. And he said, well, if you're going to do this thing, and I know you are, here's what you got to do. Here's the number that is your time to drop the atom bomb. And I had a margin away from that. And he said, instead of getting a monthly blood test for a time, let's get a weekly blood test. If that stays stable, then every other week. And I'm like, I can do that. So that's what we did. And within 2 weeks, I found Dr. King Lee from Nippon University in Japan, his research with men on forest bathing. He would take them into the forest. They would be very meditative in their walk, very mindful, using all their senses for an hour or two. And he found there's something in the forest emitted by the trees, an aerosol, an essential oil that's imperceptible called phytoncides. And these phytoncides boost your NK or natural killing cancer cells by anywhere from 50 to 200 times for 2 weeks. And so I thought, okay, I'm not that smart a guy, but if they do it for an hour or two and it boosts them for 2 weeks, if I go out for an entire day every week, maybe this thing will become exponential. And so being raised by wolves, 2 mountain climbers, going out into the woods was like not scary. It was like, oh, I get to party kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. With no substances other than nature. I get to go out into my playground. And
Mm-hmm.
so I started going out every Thursday night, staying all night, and then all of Friday. And I started that May of 2015, and I'm happy to tell you that by March of 2016, my lymphoma was gone, again without chemo or radiation. And one of the most, I mean, that's a fantastic story, but for me, the greatest thing that happened both in the river and then in the forest was the healing psychologically and emotionally of that traumatic grief. Before I started swimming, I still was having 3 to 6 nightmares every night, reliving Mary dying and everything that happened, or some kind of crazy nightmare surrounding that. After I swam, I'd maybe have 1 or 2 a week. When I started, the day I started the swim, June 3rd, I still couldn't say Mary's name without crying. The day I got out, we were throwing a celebration for everybody that was part of the team. And I started talking about Mary, and because she was really funny. And so I was relaying funny Maryisms, and we were all laughing. And then my brother-in-law's like, "What's gotten into you?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You're talking about Mary." And I'm like, "Yeah, she was my wife for 30 years. He's like, "Dean, you haven't been able to talk. You haven't even been able to say her name for 4 years without crying." And I was like, "Oh, hadn't even noticed." And then when I got into the forest, that healing continued. I now think in the next 10 years, we will find, especially traumatic grief, is best healed in forest environments, because I'd cried myself to sleep most nights, but I'd never woke up crying. And it shocked me the first night I'm there in my backpacking hammock, way out in the middle of the wilderness, way off the path, in this sweet, beautiful, resonant area of 100-foot pines and cedars and firs that seemed really friendly. And I got in the rack probably 9:30, woke up just convulsively sobbing. And since I'm a therapist, I knew to break the old baby boomer training of big boys don't cry, just let your body release. And since there was no one around and no one could even hear me, I thought, let's let the body do what it needs to do. And so for about an hour, I just vomited up all this trauma and grief and then slept like a baby. And I thought, well, that was interesting. It happened every time I slept in the forest. I'd wake up just bawling until I didn't need to anymore. And I've found with the clients I've gotten to take out among the trees that if they've got held trauma or even just stress, after about an hour or two, I tell them the trees pull it out of you. Do I scientifically know all the ins and outs? No. I think we will. But experientially, it's something I'm absolutely sure of.
Mm. Yeah. It's profound. There's a lot of, it's really interesting. I want to go back. I drew this figure 8 on my, I have a little, I like podcasts like this.
Nice. Wow.
I'm mapping things for my brain just so I can go back. And I just had a peptide expert before on you mapping out, I'm weird. And so I drew this figure 8, and I find it interestingly resonant that you grew up in a place where you mentioned this river, which was sick, covered with oil, and that you took a departure from for 30 years, and you went to the middle of the country. And on its own timeline, it let go of its illness. And on your own timeline, you let go of your illness. And there's a tie-in to that river. And I find it so interesting that intersection, how it meets with your body being willing to let go, or being the impetus or the onset to let go of some of that grief, and it let go of some of its toxicity. And then here you are today, both in a unique expression and being very revitalized.
Right.
Very,
Yeah.
very, very resonant. And I just see this really clear figure eight. And I love that. Yeah. I love that. And you say you're like, I don't have evidence, but I believe this to be true, that's been your experience. Now, I know I have 5 or 6 examples of people who have done this in nature and throughout time. And I do remember stories of some of the initial, I think it recounts of the Roman military acquisition of different countries, and warriors would come back from being out years and years and years, and what they found is they were coming back being with their wives, and either they would kill themselves, or sometimes they would kill their families. And what they found they needed to do is park this warrior mindset out in the woods alone, oftentimes with mushrooms, and let the vibration of war be pulled out of them by the forest. And there was this transition time, and it's something that makes sense to me in my brain. But it's something that oftentimes we try to outthink, right? Oh, I can just jump back into life. I'm good. I don't need to, whatever this grieving process looks like. It's something that you found and crafted intuitively. And then you had an experience where, oh, well, it worked. So I think your experience, your deep knowing is valid.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think we need the double-blind placebo study.
No, nor do I. I mean, I've got so much anecdotal and experiential experience with myself and others that here in the last few months, I've developed my own little brand of psychology I'm calling bio-wild psychology. And it's very different than other forms of psychology in that it starts with a different premise and ends with a different outcome. And then you have to do much different things in between. But for example, the start, the beginning, the way I was raised or trained as a clinical therapist is we start by looking at the person and their experiences, their family, and their wounds, and diagnose those wounds and concentrate on those wounds. In other words, it starts with the person. To me, that doesn't fit nature at all. It's like taking a tree and trying to just dig it up and then look at it. That's not how life works. We are bioelectric, energetic beings. That's not hippie hoo-ha anymore. I always kind of intuitively knew it wasn't, but now we do have research proving that it isn't. And so I believe at the start of bio-wild psychology, the way you start is looking at how well charged the human being is. Are they getting out and connecting with nature? Because that we live on this big battery. And if we don't plug into the planet, we are not going to be happy or healthy or vibrant because we are at a low charge. People plug in their cell phones every night so that the cell phone will work efficiently. And we experienced what happens when you got crappy internet. You got a poor connection. And yet we want a strong connection with ourselves, with those we love, with our purpose, and with the world. And yet we never take time to plug ourselves in and charge. And so that's how bio-wild psychology starts, is starting with teaching people in their way how to recharge and how elemental that is. And then how most psychology ends is the person's happy, stable, healthy, and strong by themselves. The end result is a stronger human being. Well, that doesn't fit nature. A tree doesn't become the biggest tree in the forest to be the biggest tree in the forest. That makes no sense. And so bio-wild psychology, the outcome is to give from your overflow, to be so happy, so healthy then you bear fruit and you give to others. It's a more natural evolution and form of therapeutic intervention that I think makes more sense and is much more aligned with who we are in nature.
Yeah. Amen. Dean, I have to have you back on
Yeah,
because
I'd love that.
I do. I mean, as many times you ever want to come back.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
want to be respectful of our hour. I would love to just do a couple end questions. And I just want to say that I'm hearing you give this recount of this incredible story, and please go read Dean's book. Tell us the title of your first
The
book.
Wild Cure from Death to Life on Oregon's Longest River. And I'll just have to plug real quick. I think you're going to like it. We wrote it specifically so that it's about a 2-sitting read. It's not a long read. And we rewrote the entire book 3 different times because the first 2 times it just felt unlike me. It felt like I was bragging and talking about myself. And so Bree, who helped me write it, my daughter, who's an author and a novelist, she got the idea of creating what's called braided interview. And so she interviewed all the team and everybody that was involved. And then she's taken those and threaded those together so it creates the narrative. And so you get to see everybody's adventure and what this thing did for all of us, not just me. And so to me, it's much more organic and authentic and much less filled with inflated ego.
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah, that was my experience.
Good.
And then I also want to comment is that, a lot of times we can hear these stories and by no means, I know you're not telling people to forego doctors and chemotherapy and medical advanced treatments. But it's easy to listen to your story or to jump into a soundbite about what Dean did and say, well, actually what Dean did was he listened to his dad and he listened to an expert medical team, and you went and you sought somebody that understood the nuance of these, how to boost a natural killer cell within nature, and you had a timeline and you had checkpoints. So I think that's a really important part of the story that we want to throw those away. You did have some good safeguards. You had a team around you, and I just give that for people hearing the
I
story
think
in its
it's
full
really, I'm
context.
so glad you mentioned it because I get a lot of hate online. I'm killing people and all this kind of stuff. They make me too binary. They make it seem as though I'm against chemo and radiation, and I'm not at all. And I'm not against regular Western medicine. I just wanted to hold off some of those things to see what I could do without them until I knew I couldn't. And I had the checks and balances, like you said. So I think both and approach is the wisest.
That's right. That's right. And in the same breath, I'll applaud you for taking radical ownership of your health. It's a great tale, great story. Give us one of your favorite lessons from the river.
That we are not superior. We are so ego driven. We think we are the pinnacle of creation. And we, I believe, are only equals here on this planet. Everything is so much more full of life and biointelligence than we ever guess in our current culture. And you look at the ancients and the indigenous, they knew that. And we see that style of thinking as primitive, but it's actually, I believe, advanced. And all of science is starting to prove that to us. I developed as crazy as this sounds, a real relationship with what I call Mama River. And she healed me. And I even see myself as one step down from her because she's big and beautiful and wise and did this thing and called me to her. And some of the big trees, I feel the same. And so we are just one of the many living species on this earth. We are not the diamond that we think we are.
Yeah.
And once you let go of that, life becomes a beautiful synthesis and a symphony of life all around you that can only bring a bit of gratitude to you every day.
Beautiful. And then if you would be so kind to people out there that are struggling with a chronic illness or going through cancer, if you could offer them some guidance and advice, what would you say?
Remember, you are the boss of your body, and do whatever you have to do to be your own best advocate. If you go in there and expect, and I see this happen time and time again, people go in and they see the doctor as either a parent figure or a godlike status, and they put all of their trust and all their hope in the doctor. And then even when they get better, most cancer survivors that I know that have done that are scared constantly that they're going to go out of remission because, number one, they don't know what the hell the doctor did, or they give the doctor or the medication credit and not the process of healing. And so go in there and know that the doctor is your expert consultant, but not your boss. You are the boss of your body. You've got to own this. And for most of us, there's a reason you're sick. And so you might have to unlearn it. Some people, like Mary, I think just get poisoned. You know, she grew up in this small town, got washed over with DDT many times as a child. And I think that's probably why she got a brain tumor. Me? No, I was heart sick, heartbroken, eating like crap, never sleeping, and feeling sorry for myself. And that mental and emotional state led to sickness. So you need to know what you've been doing and what you can do in order to get better. You've got to be in charge of your own process.
Beautiful. Dean, it's one of the best interviews I've ever done.
Oh, wow. Well, thank
So
you.
I'm inspired, and it's very divine that we had to punt and wait for better signal and better bandwidth because, yeah, I had an amazing night's sleep, and
Oh,
I got in the cold this morning, and I sat and did breath work this morning, and when I was done, I was like, I felt so open and ready to sit down and hold space for this. So I can't wait to do more.
Yeah, anytime. Especially you being you. You know, I've told you before, I'm probably one of the biggest Freddie fans out there. So anytime you want me back, brother, I'm here.
I love it. Thank you for all you do, Dean. Big love.
Thank you. All right.